think quitting, done right, quitting can be just as much of an art form as commitment, or just as important as commitment. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
I'm Elliot.
And today's story, which we'll get to in just a minute, goes out to all the quitters in the world.
Yes, it does. Well, the committed
committed quitters. Like when to know when to quit. When to know when to quit.
When to know when to quit, and the art of committing to quitting.
Well, there you go. Anyway, big, exciting, fun announcement before we jump into our sponsors. So Here's My Story is going to be at the National Association of Broadcasters next week, recording live in the exhibit hall.
Yes.
In front of an audience. And I'm super excited and a little nervous.
And excited just to be selected and to be asked to do this.
So I will say this could be a topic. Actually, this could be a topic all of itself. I submitted us just for the practice of submitting to something and, go to the practice of practicing, distilling our information down to a form and whatnot. I actually did not think that they would select us. So
no, in fact, I think our discussion was, should I submit this? I'm like, yeah, they'll never pick us.
Why not? They'll never pick us. Just go for it. Anyway, So we'll be there next week.
Okay.
You want to thank our sponsors?
I do. So
even if you don't, please thank our sponsors.
I will. Thank you to Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Marycraft Staffing and HR Solutions. And you have a story.
I do. So here's my story. My son is 16, and we had decided that we wanted him to get more involved with something. And so we kind of set this whole ball rolling and got him, he said yes to it, but he was a little draggy, his feet. and so we committed to it. And then we got into it a little bit more. And it's different than what he thought it was, different than what we all thought it was. And I'm not being more specific just because that doesn't matter. Right. But he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do the thing. And he was a little kind of meh about it in the first place. And we really thought it was more important. But what's interesting is that his issues with not wanting to do it are actually really good issues. He was like, I don't believe this. Like, I'm not... This like goes against something that I've decided I care about or don't care about or whatever, which is a valid point. And so my husband and I ended up in this really interesting conversation yesterday because he of course said, well, but once you committed to something, you have to stick with it. It's important. He knows that.
This sounds like a dad voice. That was your husband.
Well, yeah, I wasn't even trying to he doesn't sound like that, but but that was my dad voice. It was very definitive. Well, he needs, he signed up for it. He said yes, he needs to do it.
Okay.
And I don't know that that's not the right answer. I really haven't decided, but my immediate reaction was, I talk to people all day long who have committed to things that, whether it's a line of their business, whether it's a board that they're on, whether it's a relationship or a partnership or bringing somebody onto the team, a hire or whatever, they have committed to things that no longer serve them or that they realize are wrong. And they really, really, really struggle with saying no to those things. And I fundamentally, of course, it's far more complicated when it's my own child and you're trying to discern the difference. But fundamentally, I don't believe that commitment is always the thing, always the skill to flex. I think quitting done right, quitting can be just as much of an art form as commitment or just as important as commitment. But it's not one that's terribly celebrated. No one's like, yay, be a quitter. You did a really good job of quitting.
Yes.
Well, no, of course. Yeah, exactly. So it again feels like one of these places where it's often viewed in a very binary way. And so I'm just really curious, like how you discern, well, first of all, if you agree that sometimes it's good to quit, how do you discern when the most important thing is following through on commitment and when sometimes quitting is actually the more noble or valuable or whatever word we want to assign to it, the right way to go?
Well, I mean, first of all, I can't respond to this story without at least giving a shout out to Scott, who already pointed out that both of us are bad parents. And we had this argument on the Facebook group as to which one was worse. But moving beyond that,
Thanks, Scott.
comment, thank you, Scott. I guess it depends for me in part on the reasons behind quitting and the reasons behind the activity. So first of all, does the commitment involve other people relying on you? Like you mentioned, quitting a board. Mm-hmm. Well, okay.
Versus like quitting music lessons.
Versus quitting music lessons. So is there other people's reliance, or is it personal enrichment? And if it's personal enrichment, then what are you trying to accomplish? Meaning, is it just going to piano, or when you're looking at the issue from a parent's perspective, you've got the other baggage, which is, what am I teaching them about building character, and what part of that? So if you're talking about it from an employee's point of view or an initiative in your business, what does that say? If we start it and we quit it, does that say something about our management team and it wasn't thought out, and that we're
not consistent, or we haven't thought it through,
and we haven't followed through?
Right. So, but this is why it's such an interesting question to me, though. If just as a diagnostic question, you start something, let's say a line of business or something in your company, you start it, and a somewhat short way down the path, you are able to pretty clearly discern that it's the wrong thing, that you were wrong about heading in that direction. And you know that stopping it will make you look inconsistent or flighty, or will freak out your employees or freak out your clients or whatever it is. I mean, really, if you're deciding between continue on a path you know is not right for you or the company, or worrying about that those two things are not, like, I don't know that like keeping going is always the right way to go.
Well, first of all, I would submit that many, many times the employees already have figured out that it's the wrong path. And so if you're and it's
because
true with an employee too. It's not working.
That's true. That's true.
So a lot of times they're like, oh, please, I just really hope.
Oh my gosh. The number of times that I have had a leader wring their hands over letting someone go, and they're terrified that the staff is just going to be furious or upset. And then it happens. They're like, oh, thank God.
That's exactly right. So a lot of times they say, I tend to fall into the camp of saying, as soon as you know that it's bad, and if it's bad, not right now, because there is a value to sticking with things when it sucks, but if you know it's bad right now and it's going down a bad path, I just think you get out and you worry about the communication.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And so to back it up, when it's not so clear, there is a distinction. If we go back to like, are you on a board where somebody's depending on you versus, you've taken up a hobby, whether it's music lessons or whatever it is. There is absolutely the lesson, and I keep coming back to like what I'm teaching my kids. There's the lesson of stick through things when they're not fun, because there is value on the other side. There's the lesson of you made a commitment, you stick with it, even if it's not fun anymore. And there's the lesson of continually discern what path you're headed in this one life you get, and keep moving in the direction of what's right for you. And those three things, when they don't line up, I think I keep using the word discernment because I don't think there's like I think the problem, my issue is with it is if it seems like there is an answer to that question.
Well, I think that maybe there is an answer to that question.
No, Elliot, I just said that's not.
Well, and here's why. So we've talked about a North Star before. So if you say that your North Star is, does it support the core value of our organization? Yes, no. And that's probably not the right way to frame the question, because we're dealing with an amorphous subject, Sure. But if we have this one organization and we say, does it support our efforts to build quality in this particular product? If then you start honing in on an easier answer, yes, it does. No, it doesn't. This initiative does not. And you get down to, well, this initiative might in 5 years, but it doesn't now. And then it becomes a resource allocation issue. Well,
I think resource allocation is relevant both in the organizational sense as well as we often talk about the personal leadership energy sense. I mean, because I think to your point, if you're looking at the things you're involved in, not just the organization, it's like, why did you get involved in that thing in the first place? Plenty of us have said yes to things because for no other reason than it felt really good and flattering to be asked.
Yeah.
I was approached by the Maryland what was it? It was like the Maryland Association of Marketing. It had to do with marketing, and it was like statewide. They were like, we want you on the board. And I got like 2 or 3 meetings into talking to them about it. And then honestly, it was one of these like, I sort of shook up like, wait a minute. I'm not a marketer. Like why on earth would I invest my time and energy in this? And it's a fantastic organization. It has nothing to do with their value. It's just their alignment with what I care most about. And I think we've all gotten involved with those so if you can look back and say, the mistake I made was actually saying yes in the first place, then I think quitting has a higher, because if you know that saying yes was the wrong thing, then if you continue to be involved, and it depends on the level of reliance on you, I think, but it is such an energy drain because you know it's the wrong thing. It's like ripe for resentments. You're probably not going to be the best contributor. I think it just leads to a new question, which is there someone else who could come in and backfill who has like fresh, truly devoted energy for this? Maybe the organization would be better off with someone else besides me. Maybe not, if that's not possible, but
well, I think that if you know right off the bat, or if you should have known that it was a mistake to say yes from the very beginning, what I would submit is that you didn't ask the question at the beginning. What interest is this serving?
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. So, what interest is this serving? So when Alex announced that he wanted to quit baseball in the middle of the season, and my issue was, no, you made a commitment, you stick to it, etc. But he was miserable. He was absolutely miserable. And then there came a time when Nikki and I asked the question, well, what interest is this serving? Is it teaching him to stick with things, or is it just teaching him that his most valuable commodity, which is time, is going to be wasted because he's going to be miserable consistently for several months?
And I do think there is a different question here, given the duration of the commitment, obviously. You don't quit in the middle of something and it was only a month-long thing. Maybe you can like stomach through. But yeah, I mean, you certainly, where it really gets risky is when there are things that are more, multi-year, even lifetime paths you're on, and being hesitant to back off of them, even when you know they're real. But back to your point.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. We all get asked things in business. I was recently asked to be part of this organization and to be counsel on this particular facet to it. And I know it's a great opportunity. And I know that the person who asked me was doing me a real favor by reaching out because other people wanted it and he thought it would be a good fit. But the interest that it would serve for me was in getting new clients in this particular field. And I had to think about it and say, on the one hand, I don't actually want any clients in this particular field or want any new clients in this particular field. I'm full up. And then there's part of me, which is like, you hear about this from people who are raised in the Depression, which is they can never have enough food, right? So I worry about,
absolutely.
Well, if I turn down this opportunity, what if there is no other opportunity?
Well, and the really important thing, I think, to hear there is the difference between a fear-based basis and not to be just like, throw caution to the wind and not consider risks of things in business. Obviously, you have to do that. But when the justification for kind of moving off your gut on something is a fear-based thing, I just think it at least needs a second glance.
Right. I agree. Because generally speaking, the mistakes, when I look back on certain bad decisions I've made them out of fear. So I would accept this client that's not a right fit out of the fear of, is there going to be a hole in my cash flow if I don't? Yeah. Or are they going to say something to the person who recommended them and then I'm going to burn a relationship or whatever it happens to be? So you're right. Fear-based decisions, I can diagnose that in my own business, in my own professional life, are generally bad decisions waiting to happen.
If you can catch them in the moment.
So going back to your story, the question that I had is, was your reluctance to let Turner quit arising out of the fear that he would develop some sort of character defect because he didn't learn how to commit to something? Was it the fear of missing out on whatever particular skill or experience this thing would teach him? Was it the fear of being seen as parents that could be kind of pushed over if he resisted hard enough?
Question.
What where did that come from for you? And then what happened?
Yeah, no, it's a great one. It's an as yet unanswered question because we're still talking about it. But interestingly, for me, the thing I care about most is that he develops, this is going to like wrap it in and on itself, that he develops the skill to discern the difference between the two. Because I want him to be someone who can notice the difference between, well, I just want to quit because I'm bored. And like, it's sort of a, I don't know if there's sort of a laissez-faire path of least resistance or even worse, like, or is what's really going on is that it is something you want and you got into it and it was going to actually require of you something that feels uncomfortable, like interacting with adults in an unknown environment that you might end up looking like an idiot or something that you are nervous about. If that's the case, then I want him to push on through. Yeah. And so for me, this doesn't quite answer your question. The bigger picture that I care about is this process of discerning the difference. I actually don't really care whether he continues on the thing or not. I don't think that the thing itself holds that much importance. I just want us to think through kind of what lesson are we teaching in the moment. Which to me is the greater point, because it's so interesting. I feel like sometimes as I work with folks and I watch my own development and my kids' development and whatnot, that there's like this funny pendulum swing that, somebody lacks confidence. And so you're kind of working on them to really, land on their confidence. And then the minute they really establish some strong confidence, I feel like the conversation immediately changes to like, and now let's watch out for you being an arrogant jerk. and the same kinds of things, I see it a lot as people are moving into more of like a CEO role in their company as they're growing it and they need to back off and not have their fingers in everything. Then as soon as they've sort of backed up, it's like, okay, now a little too far, now come back in. So there's always this question that I think is of real value of like, what matters now? Like, what is because I know I get really confused taking it back to parenting for a second. If I try and think of like the whole continuum of parenting and life, but it's like in this moment, what's most important? It reminds me a tiny bit of, I think I've mentioned this before, both my kids, actually all four of us in the family are pretty wildly dyslexic. Both my kids go to a school that's for kids with learning-based language issues. And I love how and where they apply all the way through 8th grade when spelling counts. Because there's certain classes where like, no, we don't want them worrying about spelling. We want them to express themselves verbally without, cutting it down based on which words they already know how to spell. So in this class, spelling doesn't matter. Over here, where we're actually working on vocabulary, it does matter. So that kind of discernment of what's the point right now? What thing are we actually wanting to teach in this organization? And let's make sure we reinforce that and that we're not just like hammering the rules home because they have to be.
Well, and I get into this a lot with clients in places where you really don't think that this subject would come up. So, for example, in the most dry, boring, lengthy, legalese-laden contracts, I'll sit there and I'll talk to them and they'll say, okay, well, what do you think we should do in this situation? And my answer really is, I'm not telling you not to do this. What my point of emphasis is, this has to be an educated decision. You have to be aware. I want you to go through I want to walk with you through the process of evaluating the risks of all angles of this so that when you make a call, it is based upon gathering as much information through this process as possible. And then whatever call you make, you can be comfortable with.
Right.
And they'll say, okay, I get that. I totally understand that. So what do you think we should do? And, but part of it just reminds me of this because what I heard you say is that ultimately it doesn't matter what the decision on this particular activity is, as long as there seems to be a mindful approach and he develops the skill to discern why a decision is being made. Is it whether it's fear-based or whether it's boredom-based or whether it's laziness-based or whether it's value-based?
Yeah.
So I think that's really where I get to from the very beginning, which is, why do you make this decision? I don't think the decision matters. I think it's the why.
Definitely not this particular decision. I think that I'm trying to think through if I think that applies in business as much. Although if you're developing, I do think there's some use of, if you're developing people or you're developing a culture or you're developing maybe anything in business, like being really clear on what outcome you're trying to get and what's most important, I think then often changes the question. So Are we really going to continue to do this thing? I mean, here's a perfect example. I mean, isn't this a classic, famous story? And I might get pieces of it wrong, but the sentiment is here. Like when Steve Jobs took over Apple, didn't he scrap like a huge portion of their product line so that they could focus on just few things?
What he
did
one thing, really. Was, and this is the apocryphal story from the Isaacson biography, it said that he laid out all of the products that were developed during the John Scully era, and he put them on a table and he said, okay, now which one of these would I advise my mother to buy? And so Steve Jobs in that moment, whether it's a true story or just a metaphor, was saying, okay, I've identified who my key demographic is in this. It's my mother. It's not General Motors or whatever.
Right.
It's my mother. Because we're developing personal computing products. And then where are we going to give a recommendation? If we have 1,000 different options, then we're going to drive her into the arms of Microsoft or somebody else. So we're going to be laser focused on just this value or just this customer.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's what
that required a whole swath of quitting.
Yes.
To get to where they
And I'm sure
next.
There were so many development teams that all of a sudden found themselves without
and marketing budgets that had been invested for years to promote some product or something. I mean, I think that the sort of a very dramatic version of it is, if somebody is in high school and they think they want to go to med school, and then they go to, they go to college and then med school, and then they're going through all the steps and things and committees and all the parts you have to do and to become a doctor. If somewhere along the way, as you're just following steps, you look up and you're like, oh, this isn't, I've been walking this destination. This isn't where I want to go. I mean, you can feel how, but you spent all this time and energy putting effort into it. But so it can feel like, I committed to it. I should keep going. But if the alternative, like when you actually match it up against the alternative of so what, you're going to spend a lifetime doing something you don't love? Like in Apple's case, if we don't quit these things, then we have to use our finite resources to keep them going and alive. And so I think that quitting gets a bad rap.
It does. And I see this, or one other example outside my experience, and then I'll bring it back to mine, is the military. The military and the Air Force. The Air Force often makes decisions, and they'll say, you know what, after all of this money and development, after building all of these things, after all of this training, we're going to phase out the A-10 Warthog or whatever the plane is. And when you phase out a plane, you're phasing out the personnel who trained on that plane. You're phasing out pilots. You don't retask them to the F-22.
Oh, you don't?
No, you don't.
Oh. Wow. So that's a big decision.
So it's a big decision, but they decided this no longer fits the mission. I run into this pretty frequently if you're embroiled in litigation, and all of a sudden the rationale for going forward in litigation is how much water is already under the bridge. Well, we spent this much, we've gone so far. Okay, but does it serve your interests?
Right.
Or is it better just to make a decision now, because that money's spent.
Right.
That time is spent.
Right.
So yes, there is an underappreciated art and substance to quitting.
I quit.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jodi Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.